One thing that's really important is that a Waymo Level 4 robotaxi that's currently being shipped over by Zeekr into the United States before the hardware and software is bolted on, those vehicles are probably in the 100,000 per unit, $100,000 per unit price range, whereas in Baidu, they have a Level 4 robotaxi that operates currently in China for less than 50,000 US dollars.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new edition of At the Wheel with me, Joe White of the High Speed Rodeo newsletter on Substack, and Tu Lee of Sino Auto Insights. And you can also find him on Substack and other pods as well. So it's been a busy week in the world of cars. We're going to be diving into the latest news and trends. This week, we're going to talk about the race to put robotaxis on the road in the US and China and I don't know, everywhere. And the latest from the trade wars are on our radar as well. We always have a lot to say. None of it should be taken as investment advice. Two, good to see you again. Look, let's start with automated vehicles. There's been a lot of action in the automated vehicle space. So if you don't pay attention to this every single minute, your last memory of automated vehicles and robotaxis probably are two things. GM giving up on this, Waymo making
Well,
progress, and
Ford
then
giving up first before
Ford, yeah,
GM.
Ford giving up, GM Cruise folding. Sure, Waymo making progress, Elon Musk talking a lot about robotaxis without actually delivering anything. But there's something actually there's more going on right now. Just in the last few weeks, and you were down in Florida, I guess, talking to a lot of people. What's the state of play? What did you learn down in Florida, and what do you see happening?
So I had met former Senator Jeff Brandes, a Florida senator, and he invited me down to the FAV Summit, the Florida Autonomous Vehicle Summit. It's
Hmm.
seventh or eighth year running, and it's a combination of discussions with policymakers, politicians, economic development organizations for the state of Florida, but also kind of a global view, understanding of innovation happening in the autonomous vehicle, but not only now it's evolved into eVTOL and UAVs and drones, so drone delivery. And so there was a lot of entrepreneurs, policymakers, and guys like me kind of analyzing, and investors as well at the conference. And Waymo's was a huge sponsor of the event, and it just seems like Waymo is sucking all of the air out of the room over the last few months. Lucky for us, Joe, they're going to be in Detroit sooner rather than
Yeah,
later.
I heard that. Now they've had an engineering operation here in Detroit for quite some time. I think that's related. I'm sure it's related to their partnership with Stellantis. They've partnered with Stellantis to develop to develop vehicles, but now they're going to try to put AVs or robotaxis on the streets in Detroit in the wintertime. Well, maybe not. They're going to start in the wintertime, but they're going to have to deal with winter whenever it is that they do it, and that's a big deal, right?
So they are technically the first to be putting autonomous vehicles in data collection in a four season city. And they've also announced New York City. And we should look at the rest of these announcements, these partnerships, because Uber and Lyft are going to play significant roles in autonomy in general. Uber has made announcements with not only Waymo and companies like Neuro, but they've also made announcements with Chinese autonomous vehicle makers.
Right. Yeah.
And so let me give a list of people or companies, Chinese autonomous vehicle companies, that people should start paying attention to,
Yeah, I was gonna.
namely because two of them are publicly traded in the US.
Yeah, I was gonna say you talked about Waymo sucking the oxygen out of a room. That's a United States. That's United States oxygen and United States rooms. China's a different deal, right? So talk about that because the Chinese AV companies appear to be making really quick progress toward a viable product.
So the biggest players are WeRide and Pony. And Baidu, WeRide and Pony being publicly traded in the US. Baidu, they have a division called Apollo Go.
Right.
And they by far have the most robotaxis deployed in China, about 1,000. So if we look at the North American market, US, Waymo has around 14, 1,500 vehicles total. And
Hmm.
then in China, there's about 15 to 1,700 total between Baidu, WeRide, Pony, and a few other players. Some of them have gone out of business, but we've seen WeRide and Pony also do a secondary listing a couple of weeks ago in Hong Kong to really, really build up that capital reserve in order to do battle with Waymo in the Middle East, in Europe. And then I think they're looking at Europe as well. So London being a stopping point where another autonomous vehicle startup called Wave has launched, and they have operations in San Francisco. So this is really, really getting interesting because, like you said, it's like a renaissance. It
Hmm.
went from a lot of attention and and investment 5-7 years ago with companies, to our point, like Argo,
Right.
Cruise, and then it kind of blew up with the ATG, Uber ATG, with the accident of the woman
Yeah.
being
Yeah.
killed. And so now we're
Well, and
starting to
Cruz had an
see,
accident which wasn't fatal, but it was fatal to the company. Fatal. The
right,
person apparently, as far as I know, survived. Was badly injured, but it was fatal to the company. So right, that those were big
we should
setbacks.
also mention friend of ours, Alan Hall, is now director of communications of a really revamped Motional now as well.
Which is part
So
of the Hyundai group, right? Or is
right.
essentially
Hyundai is
Hyundai.
getting back into it as well. So I think the companies took a step back and said, this is a long-term play and we're back in. Commitments to investment are being made. But one thing that's really important is that a Waymo level 4 robotaxi that's currently being shipped over by Zeekr into the United States before the hardware and software is bolted on. Those vehicles are probably in the 100,000 per unit, $100,000 per unit price range. Whereas in Baidu, they have a level 4 robotaxi that operates currently in China for less than 50,000 US.
Well, and
There's a
and
huge delta between
yeah, and
competitiveness of robotaxis.
that's super important. And one of my former colleagues at the Wall Street Journal, Peter Landers, just did a piece. He went to Beijing and took a ride in, I think it was a Baidu taxi. I mean, he might have gone some other ones as well. But his point was the experience was pretty good. So you have robo taxis that are cheaper from the point of view of cheaper to build, um, and but the cheapness apparently isn't compromising the quality of the experience for the user, or at least not to the not that much. So if they have equivalent ride experience at half the cost, that's usually a winner unless unless they're screwing up something that we can't see, right? I mean, that's pretty significant.
Well, before generative AI, Joe, was the who owns the most data wins, I think, race. And if the vehicles are cheaper to deploy out in the wild, China has a distinct advantage now with generative AI and kind of the evolution of how AI works and the levels of compute getting cheaper and cheaper. Not only
Mhm.
cheaper, but bifurcating because now NVIDIA is not the only game in town for AI chips and AI silicon.
Right.
There are some Chinese domestic players that are really trying to inch their way into NVIDIA's space. So, and this dovetails into our conversation. Maybe we can continue talking about AVs for a few more minutes, but this dovetails into the trade restrictions and the tariffs because as parts get more expensive for the Waymos, does that make them less competitive?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. And why don't we dive into the trade situation? Because it is, it is actually trade is actually a discussion about competitiveness, and U.S. China trade and trade policy is very much an auto industry discussion. So this week, or I guess last week, the time flies. But anyway, the Supreme Court, as we speak, as far as I know, has not decided, but is deliberating whether a chunk or a portion of President Trump's tariffs, the ones instituted under the International Economic Emergency Powers Act, or IEPA, which is which is a sound I think a lot of people who run businesses, especially auto suppliers and automakers, were making when they saw what this could do to their bottom lines. Anyway, the Supreme Court is reviewing whether or not those were done legally. At least the stories I read suggested that the court, or at least the justices on the court, including the conservatives on the court, we're highly skeptical, and it's possible that Trump will have to, or not the president personally, but the government will have to refund.
Trump administration.
The Trump administration will have to refund potentially billions of dollars to different companies and different organizations that paid these tariffs when they received goods. There's a word for that which I won't use in a family podcast. But what's your take on this? Because one question I had was, how much relief is the auto industry going to get? Because some of their tariffs, or a lot of the tariffs that affect them, the automakers and AV makers, actually aren't part of this case, as I understand it.
So, but it creates this environment of uncertainty in automakers because they're so capital intensive historically. They want certainty. They need certainty to make long-term investments. And one of our friends of the show, your ex-colleague Mike Callias, wrote a piece about General Motors
Yeah.
effectively telling all their North American suppliers to de-risk by de-China-ing their supply chains. Now, what they're going to find, Joe, and I'd love your take on this, is that even firmware, even at the raw material level, there's going to be Chinese fingerprints all in supply chain. So
Yeah.
it's not going to be easy, and it's going to make things
No.
more expensive.
No, absolutely. I mean, and some of our listeners may be saying to themselves, wait a minute, wasn't it GM back in the late 90s and early 2000s that was ordering suppliers to get to China? Or if they weren't in China, they had to match the quote China price, unquote. Well, yeah, that it was GM that did that. And GM, pushed a lot of its supply chain for North America to China because they were trying to slash their costs. And so anyone in the supplier community who was on board when that was going on is probably thinking this is kind of rich. But look, you're right. I mean, times change, and I think I'm not surprised that GM management has just said, "Look, basta, enough. We need to have a North America for North America supply chain." But I agree, it's not going to happen in a month. It's not. It's going to probably take at least a product cycle, maybe longer, because first of all, you're right, a lot of the capacity to produce certain types of gear or parts and technology doesn't exist in this country. It would have to be built from zero. Magnets, I mean, rare earth magnets, a lot of components for electric vehicles, a lot of components, for combustion vehicles. The capacity to build that stuff lives in China now because of the way that things have worked over the last 20, 30 years. Companies, I'm not a CFO of a big supplier company, but I can imagine what they might say to GM is, "Hi, thanks for canceling hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars of revenue when you trashed your EV programs because you didn't believe they're going to, that they're going to sell. Thanks for that. And by the way, now you're asking us to rip up tooling and move production from China to North America in the middle of a product cycle. Gee, no thanks. Call us when you have a new model that we can tool from scratch and work the costs in from the beginning of the program to get paid."
That's the other part of being rich, or irony, is that the progress that they did make domesticating some of the supply chain, or at least manufacturing for batteries, is also getting scrapped or written off of the books.
Mm-hmm.
And so it seems really, really kind of schizophrenic what we're doing to our OEMs and supply base in North America, especially because if Canada and Mexico aren't part of the trade or free trade area, then it creates even more diciness and uncertainty.
Well, I would think so. I mean, and again, I mean, a lot of these, the big suppliers and smaller suppliers, tier two, tier three suppliers, they get product from Mexico, they get product from Canada. The kinds of commoditized products, I mean, seat covers, things like that, or that were shifted to LCC, low cost countries over the last 20, 30 years. Well, one of those low cost countries was Mexico. And if Mexico isn't good enough, and I'm going to visit, going to a session that the CEO of Lear, the big supplier company, they make seats. They do a lot of other things too. I'd be interested.
I'm a
He's
Lear
going to.
alum, by the way, Joe.
Oh,
I don't
okay.
know if you
Well, I
knew
mean,
that.
you
So
tell me. I mean, here's a company that has a lot of operations in Mexico, not just Mexico, they're a global company, but China and Mexico. And they've done that because their OEM customers are saying cost, 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 cost. And I think those are going to be difficult conversations. Like, do you want us to move to, I don't know, Alabama, somewhere in the southern U.S.? Fine, we want to have union employees, maybe, because Sean Fain of UAW is probably looking forward to organizing all those plants. Fine, but non-union in the United States, given the shortage of manufacturing or people willing to work in manufacturing, that's not a $5 an hour, not $10 an hour. It's 15, 20, $25 an hour. You have to pay people. You have to tool. And where's the tooling going to come from? Well, right now it comes from China. And
And the
right.
capital equipment,
And
right?
that's what I meant, the capital equipment, the
Yeah.
robots. So, I mean, and Trump is looking into putting tariffs on manufacturing robotics from everywhere. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, because doing that and holding the current levels of cost, which let's, look at the Q3 numbers from all these companies, the current levels of cost does not equal magnificent profit. It's single digit profit margins all the way. I think it's going to be a tough conversation for all these companies.
I'm gonna talk about two things, but here's the bottom line. The first thing that I want to talk about is that the MSRP for passenger vehicles is already going in the wrong direction.
Yeah, it's
It's over
almost 50K.
$50,000, and a microcosm the of how interconnected North America is, Mexico and Canada. I'm a Lear alum, so I was a sourcing guy. We source seats, parts for the seats that we ship to a Canadian OEM, or a US OEM that had a manufacturing site in Canada.
Hmm.
So I would source foam from Woodbridge, a supplier, a tier 2 supplier to Lear, and they had cut and sew, so the outside of the seat would be sewn by Mexico.
Yeah, I was going to say those
And
kinds of operations went to Mexico years ago.
right,
And
and
so,
they shipped the cut and sew to Woodbridge in Canada to build the seats for a factory for Daimler Chrysler at the time. And so just think of how much effort it took to actually do that, to try to optimize costs, because seats, the reason they were building locally the seats is because in logistics terms it's called a bad shipper, because you can
hmm
only fit so many seats on
hmm
a
hmm
tractor trailer. So they have
right,
to be close. When bad shippers need to be close to factories so that logistics costs don't eat up every single
right,
piece of profit. But now think of each sourcing person, each product person saying, now who are we going to source from to decontent out of China, out of Canada, and out of Mexico? Because those are three places that they need to think about. We can't say, okay, let's find a place in Canada or a supplier in Canada, because we don't know if there's a free trade agreement with them. And
right.
we
Yeah,
can't say find a
no,
supplier in Mexico because we don't know.
right. No, you don't know. Yeah, yeah, you don't know. And then if you say, fine, everything has to be built in the United States, and I can hear myself sounding like someone who does not want manufacturing jobs in the United States or thinks that's a bad idea. That is not true. I think it's a great idea. I mean, I think, look, manufacturing jobs have built the middle class in this country. I believe that. When Sean Fain says that, I believe it too. But but at the current, that current levels of cost have been built on cheaper labor than is available in the United States. So, something's got to give. Well, if it's got to give, but it seems like something's got to give, because, as you say, the average price of the vehicle is at a point where um, many people in this country, I'm not even sure if it's most at this point, it's not even affordable. It's just not a question. You can't, average household with the price of everything going through the roof, $50,000 vehicle is too much. So it's going to be hard.
And let me stress and nail this point home. I'm a product of that middle class because my father was a UAW worker for 27 and a half years at General
Yeah,
Motors.
there you go.
So I
Right.
wouldn't have what I have right now without him coming here at 41 years old from a war and getting a job at General Motors working at a factory when he was flying planes months before.
Hmm.
I agree with you, Joe. I'm all on board for more jobs in the United States. I want us to win. I don't think there's any dispute about how I feel about this stuff, but we have to be smart, and we can't reshore everything, because you had mentioned this in an earlier podcast. People don't want to work in factories.
Well, I mean,
So how do we
some people.
incentivize them to do that?
Well, I mean, yeah, some people do, but it's hard. It's hard work, and at the levels of pay that the companies, the non-union companies, are prepared are prepared to give, a lot of people aren't up for that. We could have a 2-hour podcast, spinning off into the adjacent topics here
Oh,
around immigration,
goodness.
right? But let's not do that. Let's just say the word immigration. I think most of our listeners will get it. That if you're looking, look, your dad was exhibit A of that. If you have a lot of factories you want to populate with people who are ready to work hard, and one answer to that, your dad, my great grandparents, fact, let people immigrate. But yeah, we'll save that for a different podcast. But look, I think it's going to be interesting to see what the uptake or what the reaction to what the story and what GM is doing. Will Ford follow suit? Will Stellantis follow suit? Will Toyota follow suit? That will be interesting to see, because one way that this could work, and this is my speculation, okay, this is not something I've reported, but you could see one way that this could work is if basically the big North American auto producers, Toyota, BMW, Mercedes, the big 9 or 10, basically could say to their tier ones and tier twos, you got to come on shore. Look at all of us. We're going to figure out how to arrange our vehicle development and our engineering so that you can scale instead of 15 different air conditioning compressors. I think the Chinese industry does this, or you tell me. I mean, they standardize on a lot of stuff to give their suppliers scale. Maybe that's the solution here, although I don't know how the hell they do it.
The one thing that is a lot different than before as well, Joe, is that we have a 15.5 million to 17 million unit market.
Right.
The European Union has still not put those types of tariffs and restrictions on Chinese suppliers. So they have combined a domestic opportunity of 20 something million, and then an additional 12, 13.5 million. So those suppliers that you mentioned, hey, let's all get together and figure this out, they're going to be less incentivized, because this is only going to be for North America, because they're not going to ship North American parts to Europe or China. They're going to ship Chinese parts to Europe, hopefully,
It's what they do now.
whether that's a Chinese domestic supplier or a legacy supplier that has operations in China, either
Yeah.
or.
Yeah.
This is the conundrum, because there's going to be a disadvantage from cost standpoint here, and I don't know how the suppliers are going to address it, and the OEMs are going to address that.
Well, no, I agree. And I mean, I do think, I mean, again, I don't, this is a little bit fanciful, but the idea of kind of a summit, but I do think that, company by company, project, program by program, it's not hard to imagine conversations that basically boil down to, suppliers saying, we cannot do the same old thing with a North American production cost base. You want us, to supply a seat. If you want that at the same piece cost as you had before, we have to do something. I don't know what that something is, have one seat instead of 25, whatever. I mean, it's either going to, the levers are pretty known, right? There's the scale lever, there's the labor cost lever, there's the quality of the materials lever. I've never heard anybody say they want crummy looking materials in a IP or a seat. So, it's just, I think that's the tension I can see is, you know, we can't do it the same old way at a higher cost, at a higher production cost base. So what are we going to do?
And here's the God's honest truth. It's just a numbers game, because an extreme case is raw materials, minerals, and refining at the battery side is 80-90% in China, in Asia. Seats
Yeah.
and stuff like that, that's not near as high as a percentage, but it's got to be really, really high, like 40-50%, because that's where all the demand is, first and foremost. And then if we take out 50% of the capacity, prices will just jump just because there's more demand for less capacity. And then odd man out, Slate, Rivian, Lucid, because they're low volume players, they're not in the
Mhm.
millions of units,
Mhm.
their prices should skyrocket then, correct? The
Well,
only
and
silver
yeah,
lining, really quickly, the only silver lining I see, Joe, is that because software becomes much more of a important part of the user experience, maybe people pay less attention to individual seats and the uniqueness of individual components in the vehicle.
maybe. Yeah, we'll see. I mean, Slate would certainly be the Slate Auto would certainly be a test of that, among other things. Let's wrap up with a quick look. I wrote about this. I think maybe you certainly have looked at it. Elon Musk, Tesla, RJ Scaringe is the CEO of Rivian. They both got big pay packages within the past week, November 6th, the same day. Interesting timing. Musk could be worth who knows what, 800 billion to a trillion, depending on who's doing the accounting. RJ Scaringe, his board is offering him just under 5 billion if I read it right, and but they also are giving him a significant stake in an automation spinoff called Mind Robotics. I'm sure surely that could be worth something. But it's interesting, and this is what I said, and I don't know if you agree with me about this. I said here are these CEOs getting these big kind of AI industry scale, certainly Musk's AI industry scale pay deals, to kind of stay with the program. At the same time as EV sales softening, weakening. Tesla's losing ground in China and Europe. You were saying before we got on that maybe EV sales aren't collapsing the way a lot of the mainstream media and frankly, I expect they will, at least in the short term. What do you make of all this? Big pay, shrinking companies. Is that fair, or is there actually a different narrative we should be talking about?
I'm gonna bring up a very American thing, American football, college football. Brian Kelly, who is the LSU head coach, who just got fired because he won a lot of games. He just never won a national title. His consolation prize, a $56 million check for getting fired. So
I never got one of those.
right,
Well,
but
I never
here's
really got fired either, but that's what. Move on. Go on. Tell me
so
more.
here's the thing about Elon. I think they bamboozled everybody because they made this pay package so high that he lands on the moon, he shoots for the stars, he lands on the moon, he's still 800 billion or 700 billion dollars in a pay package. It's not all or nothing. He gets money
Yeah,
for
no, that's
achieving
right.
some of these targets.
And RJ Scringe's pay deal, and again, I can't recite you every single detail, but it has I want to say 7, 8, 9 different stages. So it's gradual. It's a stair step. It's a stair step. He hits a certain level, he gets some shares. He hits another level, he gets some shares. So it's not all or nothing. You're right. And Musk is the same, is a similar construction. They're actually, I think, broadly in the same philosophically, the boards have used a similar template, staged payout that ends at a big number. Yeah.
And my question for the board and for Musk is how much of those targets are they looking at for or forecasted for the China market? Because that first number, the 20 million cumulative, he's going to hit that. They're obviously going to hit that number because they're already at 8 or 9 million units
Well, and if
total since day
you count
one.
the Optimus robots that he's promising, yeah,
Yeah.
he'll get there.
And so so here's the thing about Tesla. In October, they in China they sold 26,000 units. That is a year over year decline of 36% in the China market. And so without so let's say they got to get to 20-30 million units a year because they're going to be an $8 trillion company, right, Joe? So they need to sell more than Toyota, obviously.
Yeah,
Or
a
you would
lot more.
think, or you would think.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and at a high profit margin. But go ahead. Yeah,
How many high runners would they have to have? Like from a product standpoint, how many Model Ys and Model 3s would they have to have? Because those are their two high runners and they're 5 and 6 years old. And if we look at the BYDs, now the Geelys, now the Woolings, who are in the 10, 12, $14,000 price point, I don't think Tesla can build a car under $20,000 profitably and still compete or outcompete a BYD plus a Geely. It's not. one-on-one. It's not BYD versus Tesla. It's Tesla versus all of China EV Inc. under 20,000 US dollars. And then
Right.
BYD is in 100 markets, Joe. So every single market that Tesla enters to try to build that mass market sales volume, they're going to find a competitor
Well,
beating
well,
them.
and that's happening already in Europe. I mean, again, they reported the European industry group reported sales, and Tesla sales in Germany and in Europe are also down.
Norway's
Double
down,
digits.
Denmark's down.
Yeah,
Yeah.
double digits, and that's some combination probably of people being bored with the product. Some people are still mad at Elon Musk for his behavior in our election cycle, although that's getting to be a long time ago, and maybe not really the excuse that anyone or the reason anyone should use. But right, Chinese competition is in Europe, stepping up in Europe. BYD is building plants there, so you're right. There's nowhere to run, nowhere to hide except the United States for now. I mean, that's it. And I'm not clear on what this latest Tesla sales in the U.S. are, but they also they have competition here as well.
At the end of the day, Joe, in order to even get close to a 10, 20 million unit number sales volume, annual sales volume for Tesla, they would need to have about 50% market share in the US, in Europe, and in China.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
it,
I so
is that going to happen?
yeah, I don't know. And I'll tell you what, I'm definitely joining the, I think, growing group of people who, listening to Elon Musk talk about Tesla. RJ Scringe is you shouldn't lump him. He's not going at this the same way as Elon Musk. They're two very separate individuals with very separate strategies and styles. But I read Elon Musk's speech to his shareholders after he got his pay deal. He talked for about an hour, and I watched a good bit of it on. I watched a good bit of YouTube as well. If you do that, if you read what he said, or if you watch what he said to his shareholders, it's very clear that he is moved on from electric vehicles. He is talking on and on about the Optimus robot, on and on about the cyber cab, the automated cab, or automated car that he's been promising for a long time. And he says now he's going to deliver it next year. I think April 2026 was the the caption underneath the video of this thing. Um, that's what he's talking about. He's talking about physical AI, or mobile AI, and the car company aspect of Tesla. It seems to be kind of being put on, if you will, autopilot. I think you pointed this out to me. Two of the key vehicle program managers at Tesla, including the individual who was leading the Model Y, they quit the company just after I think that was came out after the annual
Two
meeting.
of them on the same day.
Yeah, same day. I don't know. I don't remember the names, but the individual who was in charge of the Cybertruck program, which has obviously not been that successful, but the Model Y is one of the most successful automotive products ever, and the individual leading that program quit. I don't know why, but most people don't quit when everything's going great, and they've been told that the sky's the limit for what they can do, with their program. Right? Sometimes a lot of people quit when they're told you're going on maintenance. We're going to do software updates. We're not going to do major body changes or design changes. We're putting our money in this robot thing. So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. But Rivian's a different animal, but at the same time, this Mind Robotics spinoff, what they're spinning off is an operation within Rivian that has been developing manufacturing automation for Rivian. They're turning that into a separate company. I mean, and RJ was talking about how there's a lot of AI and data collection that's involved there. It wasn't totally clear from what he said. He didn't say much if they were going to hoping that they could make Mind Robotics essentially a contractor to other companies. But again, the idea that, oh, we're not just building vehicles, we've got this AI intellectual property and this capability, and we want to be involved in and seen as an AI kind of play. And so we'll see.
Well, Joe, I God bless RJ, because I also don't want to lump him into the Tesla and Elon bucket.
Mm-hmm.
But if this AI and manufacturing entities works so well, how come Rivian can't get their costs down? Number one, and number two, they
Well,
can
yeah,
barely make a few thousand cars a
I,
month.
I did some math. I did some math on their Q3 numbers, and as far as I know, I got it right. Lost gross. They had a gross loss in revenue. Pardon me, minus cost of production. Average gross loss per vehicle was $37,000. I mean, it cost them effectively. It cost them $37,000 more to build the vehicle than they got back in revenue from their customers. That's obviously not sustainable, and the company knows that, and they've told investors we're going to fix this. But boy, that's those are rough numbers.
And if uh, it doesn't, I'm hopeful. I think the R2 could be a very successful high volume
Critical.
vehicle for them.
Yeah, it's critical that it is. Yes.
But if costs of manufacturing and losses are going the wrong way, then adding volume, I don't know if it really might reduce that loss, but they ultimately need to be more efficient, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And their CFO talked about that. I think around this conference that we were both at, the Reuters conference at the end of October. They're working on that. I mean, they've developed a new electrical architecture for the R1, which is their launch, the original vehicle that you can buy today, which they're adapting or basically porting to the R2. And that electrical architecture, she said, was significantly less expensive and saves them, I think she said thousands per vehicle. So, I mean, the Q3 numbers might be the worst numbers we'll see from them, and the numbers will get better from here. But yeah, it's a big hole, and it doesn't help that in the United States, the government support for EVs is gone. I know Electrek, I think you pointed this out to me, Electrek, the electric vehicle website is saying that the narrative that EV sales are cratering is incorrect. You know, if that's the case, great, and we'll see it in the Q4 numbers. But if
Or let me let
volume
me let me do this real
ebbs,
quick.
it's tough. Yeah,
Let me pull out the numbers for the first 10 months. Globally, plus 23% year over year. EU, plus 32%. United States, let's say it's flat, plus 4%. Rest of the world is 48%. Now, if we peel the layers of the onion back, it's probably because China is exporting a lot. Okay.
right.
And so those
A
numbers get
lot.
a boost because of cheaper Chinese. The one thing about Rivian that I think is really important is let's have our audience keep an eye on what Volkswagen is doing with XPeng, because there's going to be a licensing revenue that they're going to start booking through Volkswagen because of the IP that they're sharing with Volkswagen for the North American market. And if we believe that Volkswagen will do a similar thing with Rivian, maybe looking at how they're working with XPeng will give us a better indication. And that creates another pressure release valve for Rivian. But ultimately, if they can't build these cars more efficiently, because the one thing that I'd listened to the CFO, I forget her name, but
Claire McDonough.
the one thing that scared me was that it seemed like she was describing not only efficiency but a little bit of decontenting, which might take some of the Rivian DNA out of these vehicles, right? So is that the right thing to do? I don't know, but I think the most important thing, the purest form of Rivian, is probably going to be this R2 that comes out mid 20, late 26. So yeah, always interesting, and I love talking to you about this stuff. So
Yeah, no, no, never a dull moment. All right, we're going to wrap it there. All right. Well, we'll be posting this. Where are we going to be posting this? On YouTube, right?
on YouTube, and then
And
on
Substack.
Substack.
All
So
right. So
so yeah,
if you,
and then we'll be doing a few really cool things in December as well. Maybe have some guests and then do a year-end show. So please continue to stay tuned in, subscribe, like, and make some comments. Give us some comments. Let us know if there's anything that you all want us to cover in future episodes, and or if there's anything that's not on our radar that should be. So, Joe, have fun at the Lear event. I was supposed to go, but I have something else that I need to do, and I will talk with you uh, in the next week or two.
that's right. All right, too. See you later. Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.